Good morning, Rabotai. We are up to 9b3, Tet Amud Bet. You'll be glad to know that we are almost out of En Ben territory and back to the juicy bits of Megillah, by the way. And they are juicy.
They gave us a little sneak peek and then they just...
A little sneak peek. You know why? They wanted you to hang in there when they go on the En Ben detours. Okay. Let's get into it. Okay, so last class we gave the intro to this Mishnah when we talked about what a bama means. A bama means a mizbeach, and we talked about the idea that the Torah already describes that there's a time where sacrificing a korban on the bama is not allowed. But we don't know exactly what that means. So in other words, if Shlomo Farchi wants to put a mizbeach in my backyard and bring shlamim, an olah, a korban pesach, I want to bring korbanot to Hashem. Am I allowed to do so? I follow all the halachot. I just don't do it in the Beit HaMikdash. I do it in my backyard. Am I allowed to do that? The pasuk says, sorry?
Does it depend if the Beit HaMikdash is extant or not extant?
It's a little bit more complicated than that. That's what we'll see in the Mishnah and the Gemara. But the pasuk says that there is a time when you're not allowed to, and it has to be only in the place where God chooses. But it doesn't give us an exact understanding of what that means, and therefore that's where we're cutting in. Okay, so I want it to be very razor sharp, very clear, because otherwise we'll get lost. And it's actually not that complicated if you have a clear understanding. There are three levels. One level is called a bama gedola or a bama derabim. One level is called a bama ketana or a bama de yachid. So we have a large bama, a large mizbeach, or a mizbeach of the rabim of the masses. Okay. Then we have a bama yachid, which is a private mizbeach, or bama ketana, a small mizbeach. Okay, that would be the one in your backyard. But then there's a third category, and this is where most people get confused in the Mishnah and the Gemara over here. And the third category is it's not a public bama, it's a Beit HaMikdash. Is that clear?
It's the one in the Beit HaMikdash.
No, it's a temple. It's some of them we'll see exactly, but it's potentially the Mishkan. It's definitely the Beit HaMikdash. So at that stage, we're not talking about a bama ketana, a bama gedola. We're actually talking about the temple. Is that clear? So those are the three possible mizbeachs that one could be talking about. Says the Mishnah, En ben bama gedola al bama ketana. There's no difference between a bama gedola and a bama ketana. A bama that you'd have in your backyard, obviously when you're allowed to use it, and a bama gedola, which is a public bama, and we'll see exactly what classifies something as a public bama. If I tell everyone in my neighborhood, guys, if you ever want to bring a sacrifice, fadal my backyard, no problem. I have a mizbeach, and right next to it, I have a barbecue. So we are rolling, okay? So could you imagine if there's a mizbeach and it says on the side of it, Weber? Okay, fine, right? So yeah, the guy, does that make it a bama? Bamat rabim? Obviously not. Bama gedola refers to a sanctioned public bama, and we'll see exactly what that means. But the bama gedola and a bama ketana, there's no difference between the two. Only ela pesachim, only the korban pesach, which means that a korban pesach cannot be brought on your backyard bama, even in a time when you're allowed to use it. Okay? Ze hakla, says the Mishnah. This is the rule. Kol shu nidar v'nidav kareh b'bama. Anything that you can make a neder on or make a nedava, which means that the obligation of it originates with you. You said, I'm going to bring a korban. This animal is going to be a korban. Guys, we need you to go on mute. Okay? Anything like that, karev b'bama. If it's a voluntary obligation, I want to bring this animal as a korban, I'm allowed to bring it on my private bama. But if it's not, the obligation does not come because I made a neder, I promised, or I made a nedava, I gave a donation. Rather, it's a obligation that is foisted upon me, if you will, by the Torah's obligation. Eno karev b'bama. You're not allowed to bring that on a bama. Now, pay attention. Which bama does it say you can't bring it on?
First one.
So we're a little bit unsure because we start off with Bama Gdola, Bama Ktana. Then the Mishnah kind of says, okay, guys, this is the rule. You'd assume that rule would have something to do with what we were already talking about. But it sounds like the Mishnah is telling you this, what's it called? This donation, cannot be, if it's voluntary, it can be brought on a Bama, but it doesn't say which. And if it's not voluntary, then it cannot be brought on a Bama, and again, it doesn't say which. We're going to assume from the flow of the Mishnah that what is it telling you?
To be talking about something else, if it already mentioned it in the same pasuk.
Exactly. So the Mishnah already tells you major Bama, public Bama, good for everything. Minor Bama, good for everything, except for Pesachim. Then the Mishnah clarifies, Zaklal, this is the rule. Anything which you have an obligation to bring, you can't bring on a minor Mizbeach. You can only bring on a major Mizbeach. That's what you would expect that to mean. There are obvious problems with this flow. What's the first obvious problem? What's the problem with the flow?
If you can only bring obligatory ones on the public, then you can't bring voluntary ones on the public?
No, you can't. Voluntary, you for sure could bring on the public.
Pesachim is obligatory.
More than, hey, I thought you were about to say it. You almost said it. Pesachim is obligatory. Good. Come on, what else?
It's a donation.
Nope. We started the Mishnah by saying that there's no difference between a public Bama and a private Bama except for Pesachim. And then the Mishnah basically just blows up its own statement.
Yeah,
It says, so like, guys, basically this is the rule. If you're obligated to bring it, then you can't bring it on a minor. So that means that the difference between them is not only Pesachim, it's anything you're obligated to bring.
Point of the whole ratio.
Why would we not, in the beginning of the Mishnah, say specifically that, you know what the difference is between a private Bama and a public Bama? The difference is
Everything.
Obligatory korbanot versus voluntary.
Maybe give an example.
So if you're going to give the example, first of all, why would you bring Pesachim as an example when you 1 minute later differentiate based on the actual? So if you're going to say Pesachim and then cut the Mishnah, so then for brevity, you gave us an example of something. But if you then explain the example in the same Mishnah, you didn't save anything by calling it Pesachim because you said Ze'akilal and then you included more things. So the Gemara is going to deal with all of this. Says the Gemara, Pesachim v'tulo. Pesachim, it's the difference between the mizbechot, but anything more than that, there's no difference between the two. I don't understand. How could you tell me that? Ema ke'en pesachim. Right? What's latent in the Gemara's question? Yeah, what's latent in the Gemara's question? What I just asked you. The end of the Mishnah just told you that you could bring any korban that is obligatory on a bama and any korban which is not obligatory on a minor bama. So when the Mishnah told you that there's no difference between the two except for Pesachim, there obviously is, because there's more korbanot that you could bring only on a major bama, i.e. any korban that's an obligation. So what does the Mishnah mean? The Gemara answers, Ema and Pesachim, exactly like Ari just said. No, what the Mishnah means, it means like a Pesach type of korban. Now, obviously, the question I asked you is a valid question, right? If that's the case, so why would you give me this example of Pesachim? And the Gemara is adding one point here that does not get addressed in the Sefer, and that is that there are obligatory korbanot that are not tied to a day. Let me explain, okay? Pesachim is a korban that you have to bring on
Shavuot.
Pesach.
Shavuot.
Shtei Alechem is a korban you have to bring on Shavuot. Nisuch HaMayim is the thing that you have to bring on Sukkot, right? Every one of these has a day that you have to bring that korban, right? So the obligation is tied to a specific day. How about if I have a korban that the Torah says, you must bring this korban? So let's say as an example, I stole something, I denied it in court, right? So the halacha is a korban asham, right? If I ate chelev, I ate certain fats that were not allowed. There's a certain korban. How about if we made a mistake we just read about this just now. There's no difference between the Kohen Gadol Mashuach and Kohen who wore the bigadim, right? Except for the par, the bull that he brings when he makes a mistake in ruling in halakha, and the people follow his ruling. Remember? Now that korban, is that a voluntary korban? No, you have to bring it. It's an obligation. What day do we bring that on? There is no set date. That's an obligatory korban that doesn't have a set date. So when the Mishnah said Pesachim, it was telling you a certain type of obligatory korban. It was telling you an obligatory korban, i.e., that is day dependent. Exactly, that has a fixed day. It's the Gemara. Mani, who is this Tana in the Mishnah that says what we just learned? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon. This is Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon taught, Af tzibur lo ekrivu ela pesachim v'chovot shekavu alahem zman. Even the community, they are still not allowed to bring the korbanot on a major bama, ela pesachim v'chovot shekavu alahem zman. Aval chovot she'en kavu alahem zman, hacha ve'hacha lo karev. Which means that if I have a par helim davar, like we just said, I have asham vadai, asham talui, which is an obligation. I have a korban chatat, which is an obligation on me. I cannot bring any korban, which is an obligatory korban, on a if it's not date dependent, on a major bama. Where could I bring it? If I can't bring it on a minor and I can't bring it on a major, where could I bring it? In the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so now let's review again the three stages. And I want to go through this with a historical perspective. Remember we said as we started that there's an Isur Bamot, a person's not allowed to bring a Korban on a Mizbeach outside of the place that God suggested or God commanded the Jewish people to be. Now, where were those places?
Shiloh.
You forgot one. The Mishkan in the desert. Once there's a Mishkan in the desert, if a Jew decides, you know what, I'm going to go off into the desert somewhere, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to do some, yoga, and then I'm going to bring a korban over there, that's asur. Why? Because there's a place that God said, I'm going to rest here. God designated his resting place. Okay? So therefore, in that place is where you can bring korban, nowhere else. And by the way, when we say nowhere else, we mean for any korban. After the time of the Mishkan in Israel, in the desert, the Mishkan gets to Israel. Where does the Mishkan go? There's an interim period where the Mishkan goes, where we now go back, we revert to not having a place that God said, this is my resting place. So it goes back to a point where, what do we say? You could have a minor bama. So what was that place called? So the Mishkan was like a Beit HaMikdash level number one. What was the Mishkan in Israel? Not in its designated place. It shifted down to a major bama. It's a bama of the people. It's a public bama, which allowed for a minor bama to also be there in your backyard. But then we have the differentiation of what you're allowed to bring on it versus what you're allowed to bring in the major bama. And there are things that you could not bring in that Mishkan because it had a law of a major bama. So what did you do if you had those korbanot that you couldn't bring? You owed them and you'd have to bring them at some later date, okay? Let me just finish, I want to get the flow, okay? Now the Mishkan is settled in Shiloh. That Mishkan in Shiloh, you know how long it was there for? People don't realize this. It's there for 369 years. How long were the Batei Mikdash in existence? 410 and 420, okay? All the marijuana guys love that, right? 410 and 420, okay? So you have two times, sorry?
410 the first time, 420 the second.
Yes, yeah. How long is the Mishkan there for? You think the Mishkan is a tent. How long does it go? Right, that is like Costco level. You could still have a return policy if it breaks. 369 years. Now it becomes a semi-permanent structure, but it still has the tenting on top, okay? So in Shiloh had a halakha of like a Beit HaMikdash. So now the Bamot are now on pause. After Shiloh, we go back to Northern Giv'on, where we have another period of roughly 60 years, okay, where we're now downgraded to a Mishkan, which is now considered level 2, a major bama. What does that allow for? A minor bama. No problem. and then we build the Beit HaMikdash. Okay?
And then what they do in between years,
What do you mean?
in between the first and second, the first Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash.
Excellent question, Ray. Okay, so now we're going to come exactly to that. Continues the Mishnah. And it's so interesting because it's one of those scenarios where the Gemara expects you at this point to know what we didn't even learn yet. So these categorizations of stage 1, i.e. a temple level, stage 2, a bama gdola or bama derabim, and stage 3, a bama ketana or bama de yachid, it expects you to know the difference between them in this Gemara, and we haven't learned the Mishnah yet, which actually tells us what those things are. Yes?
When you have stage 1, you cannot have 2 and 3, and when you have 2, you can have 3?
Yes. Exactly, except for what we're about to learn. Okay. Says the Mishnah, and ben Shiloh Yerushalayim. There was no difference between Shiloh temple and Jerusalem temple. In Shiloh, you were allowed to eat kodshim kalim. What does kodshim kalim mean? Literally, it means minor sacrifices or light sacrifices. So if you say in the morning, you say korbanot, so you know there's kodshim kalim, shechitatan over here, kodshim kodashim, shechitatan here. This one you're allowed to eat this many days. This one you're allowed to eat this many days. This one is eaten in this place. That one is eaten in this place. Kodshim kalim, the law is you're allowed to eat it in Yerushalayim. So when you're in Shiloh, what classifies it as Yerushalayim? The Gemara says, Yerushalayim, when it's in Shiloh, which is nowhere near Jerusalem, okay, was included in Bechol Haroeh. If you could see the temple, if you could see the tabernacle, the Mishkan in Shiloh, that was considered like you're in the city. Okay? So city was decided by sight. Interestingly enough, where else did we have this? In Masechet Megillah. In the beginning, when if you're trying to decide if you're in a walled city, not walled city, you're in the city if you could see the city. Remember?
That's how we usually answer that.
No, I know that was the setup. Okay. You fell for a last week. By the way, this is a double setup because I told you if I said we learned in Masechet, it's always Tanit, but actually we're deep enough into Megillah. Okay. Now, so there's Kol Harei. So Jerusalem. What would Jerusalem, quote unquote, be in Shiloh? Anywhere where you could see the tabernacle from. Okay? That's considered Kol Harei. So what needs to be eaten in Jerusalem? Kodshim kalim, which is like a shilamim, that kind of a korban. Okay? Those things would allow to be eaten in the whole Jerusalem. How about Ma'aser Sheni? What's Ma'aser Sheni? So there is a cyclical nature to the Ma'aser that you used to give in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. Today, what does Ma'aser mean? You give 10%. And you give it to poor people, you give it to good causes. By the way, big machloket. If you give maaser, does maaser need to be given only to poor people? Could you give maaser to a yeshiva? Could you give maaser to a synagogue? Could you give maaser to build a mikveh? So over there, everybody always assumes yes. Machloket Sephardim and Ashkenazim. The Rama rules that a person's allowed to give to any devar mitzvah. Even if you want to donate money for the shul to put the lights on, literally, Ner la Ma'or, you want to donate to, no problem. Good to go. Sephardim, Ma'aser has to be given to poor people. Now there's ways around this. Why? Because if you're giving money to support the shul and there's people in the shul that are poor who really would need to support the shul themselves but for your donation to the shul, so you're giving the portion that the poor person would have to give. Or if you give money to a school and the school gives money in scholarships to poor people, so I'm not really supporting necessarily only a school or a yeshiva. I'm also supporting the poor people through the scholarship fund in the yeshiva, okay? Now, most poskim, right, but we said yesterday, like the gold, you wouldn't need to, it would go there anyway, okay? However, you see, I love, some people have private jokes. Rabbi have like private Divrei Torahs. Okay, yeah, now listen to this, because I think this is remarkable. The poskim actually say that if a person wants to be able to give and not have to worry, does it count maaser, not count maaser? They advised a Sephardi person and Ashkenazim also that took this on to do hatarat nedarim and to say that I want to be able to give my maaser to any dvar mitzvah, and then a person is allowed to give their maaser more widely. But if you want to follow the default halacha, maaser should be given to people that are poor. Now in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, there were all sorts of maaser. There were all sorts of charitable donations. And they did not necessarily go to the same destinations. Some of your tzedakah monies went to a kohen. There was the portions that belonged to the kohanim. You can't give kohen portions to a poor guy. It doesn't belong to him, it belongs to them. Then there's something that goes to the Leviim. Okay? Then there's something called Maaser Ani. Maaser. And how do we decide what goes where? So certain things are thing specific. The corner of your field belongs to the Aniyim. That's a thing specific destination for your money. The parts of the Korban that go to the Kohen, right, those things, Bikuri, those go to the Kohanim. Those things are thing specific. But there's also something which is time specific. Maaser Sheni was given, there's a 7-year cycle of Shemitah. The first and the second year go to here. The fourth and the fifth year go to here. The third year go to... Each one is divided to the Levi, to the Kohen, to the Ani, to the... So we have all these different things that kind of turn out. So what's Maaser Sheni? Maaser Sheni was in the years that you had to give, that Maaser was Maaser Sheni. What was Maaser Sheni? It was something that had an obligation to be brought to Jerusalem to be eaten in Yerushalayim. So Kodshim Kalim and Maaser Sheni, you eat them in Jerusalem. What's Jerusalem and Shiloh? Site. If you could see Shiloh. Yerushalayim, Lifnim Menachoma. So what's Jerusalem? Yerushalayim, as we know from Masechet Megillah, is a city that's surrounded by a wall. So inside the walls of Jerusalem is Jerusalem. So you're allowed to eat Kodshim Kalim and you're allowed to eat Maaser Sheni. Vekan, but both in Shiloh and in the Beit HaMikdash, Kodesh Kodashim, Nechalim Lifnim Min HaKelaim. They're eaten inside the curtains that designate the courtyard of the temple. So let's be clear. There are different stages in the temple as well. So you have Jerusalem, anyone can go. Then there's an Azara, that's for the main people, the Azar, for the Ezrat Israel, if you will, okay? Everyone could be there, Ezrat Nashim. Everyone's allowed to be there in the Beit HaMikdash. That's where the Jews would gather in the Beit HaMikdash when they would read the Torah, because all Jews could be there. Then there was an inner courtyard that only the Leviim, the Kohanim, the Leviim were able to go and sing the songs on the stairs. And then there's a place that only the Kohanim can go, okay? So it's as you get closer and closer. And then in the Beit HaMikdash, there's a room that the Kohanim can't go and only the Kohen Gadol could go, and only one day a year. Okay? So the Beit HaMikdash gets progressively more holy in these spaces. So Kodshim Kalim, Kodshei Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, the holiest Korbanot, okay? They would be eaten only Lifnim Min HaKelaim, inside the walls, literally Kelaim means the curtains, and inside those curtains, which designated it as the courtyard of the temple, that's where you could eat Kodshei Kodashim. Okay?
Question?
Yes.
Did the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash have the same type of setup in the sense where it was as you get more?
I was just thinking about that.
Like
wasn't
the Mishkan was
the
just
Mishkan
a
a circle?
rectangle,
Wasn't it?
right?
Machane?
No, Mishkan was a rectangle.
No, but the machane around it.
And then but there's kilaim around the Mishkan, and that's also rectangle. And then there's a camping around, which is
That's
the Machane Liviyah.
Right. So
But
wasn't
that's
that more of a circle?
no, yes, but that's not this. That's not Jerusalem.
No, Yerushalayim, it's like this.
So in Jerusalem, it's not circular. It's wherever the walls go.
Right.
No, it's wherever the walls go. It might be asymmetrical, going around this way. Land is not
Fenway Park.
is not it's not always symmetrical or even in any sort of shape whatsoever, right? It just ducks and dives along the border of where the city lines were. Okay, so inside there is Jerusalem. When it came to the Mishkan, so the area inside, that was the inner Azara, okay, and that was for the Kohanim. That would be the courtyard where the Kohanim would sacrifice the Korbanot, okay? So the area around it, which was Machane Leviah, that would be the area that were the Jewish people, that would be considered the Azara for the Jewish people. But it wasn't necessarily, so that inner camp, Machane Leviah doesn't supplant Jerusalem. It's called, for a Mishkan it would be called Haroeh. So that might be further than the Machane Leviah, okay? So, says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Kedushat Shiloh, here's where we come back to Ray's question. Kedushat Shiloh, yesh acharei heter. When they sanctified the Mishkan Shiloh, a heter for Bamot still existed, which means that we graduated from level 1 and level 2 to level 3. We had an actual temple, okay? So we were at level 1. At that stage, what is allowed? No 2 and 3, right? But after Shiloh is dismantled, yesh acharei heter, we go back to the laws of Bama Gdola and Bama Ktana. So
60 years.
so after Shiloh, so in the 60 years, between the Mishkan in Israel and Shiloh, it's the same thing. But the Gemara says the Kedusha of Shiloh and the Kedusha of Beit HaMikdash are the same, except for the fact that Kedusha of Shiloh has after it a heter, because we went back to Bamot, Kedushat Yerushalayim, and Acharei heterei. After we had the first temple in Jerusalem, so the interim period between the first temple and the second temple was different than the interim period between Shiloh and the first temple. Because post Shiloh, you had Bamot Ktanot, Bamot Gdalot. What was the Bama Gdola? Nov, Gidon. Alternate sites for the Mishkan, which were not considered Bet HaMikdash level sites. Okay? Post Bet HaMikdash first and second, once Jerusalem held the place of the Mishkan, there was no more Heter Bamot. So there was no Korbanot in between the first and second temple.
No korbanot between the first and second.
No Bama whatsoever.
Anywhere.
Okay, anywhere. We then moved back to the Bet HaMikdash, the second, okay? Yeah. We go back straight to level 1 again, and then after Bet HaMikdash is destroyed, again, 0, there's no second and third, because the Jerusalem and Acharei Heter. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, fascinating Gemara now. Says Rabbi Yitzchak, Shamati shemakrivim bebet chonyo bizman hazeh. 1 second, what are you talking about? I heard, okay, that there's a place called, guys, you need to go on mute. I think it's you, Avi. The Gemara says, I heard that in Bet Chonyo, which was a temple called the Temple of Chonyo, you're allowed bizman hazeh, in his time, which is the time of the Amoraim, okay, you're allowed to go bring sacrifices in this temple in Egypt. The Gemara says, Kasavar, why? What are you talking about? The temple of Chonyo? You ever heard that before? The Gemara says, Kasavar, he held Bet Chonyo lav bet avodah zarahu. It was not a house of avodah zarah. It was rather a place of worship, a temple for God in Egypt. What? The Gemara says, V'kasavar, and that must mean that even if it wasn't a place of avodah zarah, even if it was a temple for God, he must also hold Kedusha Rishona Kidsha L'Sha'ata V'lo Kidsha L'Atid Lavo. When they made the Kedusha of the first Beit HaMikdash, they said this place is holy for now. But they did not say that it retains its Kedusha as the place that God chose forever to disqualify any other place from being a possible option. So he must hold that the Kedusha of Jerusalem was not an eternal Kedusha, and you could go back to level 2 and 3 even after we went to Jerusalem. Not like what we just learned in the Mishnah. Clear?
Yeah.
Okay. The Gemara says, okay, why does he hold that? Dichtiv, because the Pasuk says, this is the Pasuk I told you that prohibits Bama. Ki lo ba'atem ad ata, you did not come yet. Ela minucha ve'ela nachala. You did not come yet to the resting place and to the inheritance. What is the whole part of this pasuk? This is one of those examples where the Gemara expects you to be proficient in all of the Torah. Read the pasuk. Ki lo ba'atem ad ata ela minucha ve'ela nachala. Asher Hashem Elokecha notenach, that God is giving you. So where is this pasuk stated? Before the Jewish people received the land of Israel. At this point, the pasuk is telling you that you're allowed to bring a korban on your own private mizbeach. Why? Because you have not yet arrived to your resting place and to your inheritance, indicating that when you did arrive at that place, again, you're allowed to bring a korban and a bama because you did not arrive yet to your resting place and to your inheritance, indicating that when you get to that point, you can no longer do a korban on a bama, right? So he's now going to learn, okay, well, what does that mean? Menucha zu Shiloh, nachala zu Yerushalayim. Menucha refers to, what does your resting place mean? A place where the Mishkan stopped moving. Where did the Mishkan stop moving? The first place that they went to before Shiloh, the Gemara did not count because it still was moving. But Shiloh, 369 years, they were there for a long time. That's a resting place. You did not come to the Menucha, that refers to Shiloh, where you're not allowed to have a 2 or 3. Nachala zu Yerushalayim, that refers to the Beit HaMikdash, where you're not allowed to have a 2 or 3. Makish nachala lemenucha. The pasuk used these two words together. It compared, you did not arrive to the resting place and to the inheritance. So what's true about the resting place, i.e. Shiloh, is true about the inheritance, i.e. the Bet HaMikdash. Just like ma menucha yesh acharei heter, just like in the menucha. When it came to Shiloh, you had afterwards a revert to the laws of Bamot, the ability to bring korban on a private mizbeach or a Bama Gdola Bama Ktana. Af nachala, also the Bet HaMikdash, yesh acharei heter. So he learns the pasuk, but then he uses the hekesh to say that the Bet HaMikdash is the same as Shiloh.
Or we just said no.
No, so Rabbi Yitzchak said that I heard from my rabbis that you could bring a korban in temple of Chonyo. Gemara says, first of all, that must mean that he holds that the temple of Chonyo is not a place of Avodah Zarah. It's a place dedicated to God. But second of all, he must also hold that when they sanctified Jerusalem, they did not end the period of Bamot, like our Mishnah said. Where did he learn this from? The person that said that this was allowed. He learned it from the Pasuk, and he made a hekesh between Menucha and Nachala, just like Shiloh. We revert back. Also after Bet HaMikdash, we revert back. This is what Rabbi Yitzchak must have held. Amru lei, they said to Rabbi Yitzchak, they tracked him down, and they said, Amrit, is that what you said? Amar lahu lo, I did not say that. Or rather, I do not say that. I reverted back, I changed my opinion. Amar Rava, Rava said, Ha-Elohim amira v'gamrina lamine. What are you talking about? He did say the halakha, and I actually learned it directly from him. He taught me this halakha. But he did revert. He did change his opinion. He just changed his mind. So then why did he take back his opinion and say that you cannot bring korban in the temple of Chonyo? Mishum kushiyat Rav Mari, from the question of Rav Mari. What did Rav Mari ask? The motive Rav Mari asked the question, Kiddushat Shiloh yesh acharei heter. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah we just learned, that after Kiddushat Shiloh, there's still a heter. Kiddushat Yerushalayim en acharei heter. After Jerusalem, there is no heter. So therefore, from the Mishnah, the words of Rabbi Yitzchak are knocked out. Ve'od we have another Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Mishabar Yerushalayim, once they came to Jerusalem, Ne'esru abamot lo haya lahem od heter. Another Mishnah that also says that once it came to Jerusalem, there was no further allowance for bringing a korban on a bamot. Right? Vehi hayeta lenachala. And the Bet HaMikdash was considered to be the inheritance that the Torah spoke about when it says, because you did not yet come to the menucha, the resting place, and to the inheritance. So Rabbi Yitzchak took back his opinion about Chonyo. Now the Gemara says, okay, what's going on? Let's go back and get into it. Tanaihi, this halacha that we're talking about over here, is a machloket Tanaim. Now, I can't really move on without telling you the story of Chonyo, and that's probably going to take us to the end of this. The Gemara actually talks about the story of Chonyo and tells us, sorry? Sorry?
That's the guy that went to Rome? Egypt.
To Egypt.
Alexandria.
Oh.
To Egypt. Who's Chonyo? Chonyo comes from the family of the Kohen Gadol. He has a brother. Chonyo has a brother called Shim'i. Anyway, the father dies. It's time for one of them to become Kohen Gadol. Now there's two Girsaot in the Gemara, but both of them are equally wild. Shim'i tells his brother, he doesn't want his brother to get the job, but his brother's very popular. So he goes to his brother and he says to his brother, listen, I think that you should become the Kohen Gadol. Chonyo's like, wow, that's so amazing. He says, and I bought you a very special outfit for your opening day. He bought him this anukli, a beautiful leather jacket and a garment. And the garment was a very effeminate garment that would have been worn by a woman. Chonyo turns up wearing this gift from his brother. Shimi goes to all the other Kohanim. He's like, do you believe this guy? The guy he promised his wife or his lover that to show her how much he loves her, he's going to wear her clothing to inaugural day in the Bet HaMikdash. Look at how he's disrespecting. The Kohanim decided this guy disrespects the Bet HaMikdash and he's going to the Mizbeach, all these things he's doing, they're going to kill him. He runs away from the Bet HaMikdash, but they chase after him. So he leaves not only the Bet HaMikdash and the job, he runs all the way to Alexandria in Egypt. Okay? And he builds a temple in Alexandria in Egypt. Now, one of the opinions of the Gemara is that the temple that he built was a temple for Avodah Zarah. He's like, that's what this is, I'm out. Okay? The other opinion is that the situation is reversed. That Chonyo wants to be the Kohen Gadol. He cross-dresses Shim'i on the day of his inauguration, tells him you should be the Kohen Gadol, rallies the Kohanim against Shim'i. They go to kill Shim'i. Shim'i says, listen, you could kill me, but first let me tell you what happened. He tells them the whole story. They buy into what's going on with Chonyo. Now they're chasing Chonyo. Chonyo goes, but he really wanted to be the Kohen Gadol, so he went and built a temple in Egypt, but his temple, the one that he built, was was for God, not for idol worship. So when the Gemara over here said that Rabbi Yitzchak, if he heard that you were allowed to bring a korban in the temple of Chonyo today, he must hold, according to that version of the story, that Chonyo's temple was a temple for God. And secondly, he must hold, like we just said, of this idea that when we sanctify Jerusalem, we didn't sanctify it forever. We sanctified it only for the time being. Now the Gemara says, Tanaihi. However, this idea that you just knocked out Rabbi Yitzchak with from our Mishnah, and you found another Mishnah that says that after Beit HaMikdash there's no more Bamot, because it was sanctified forever. Tanai, it's a machloket, Tanaim. The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Eliezer says on 10a2, Shamati kishayu bonim ba'hechal, when they built the hechal, the sanctuary. Osim kila'in lehechal, kila'in la'azara. They made curtains for walls for the hechal, kila'in la'azara, for the sanctuary and for the outer court. Why were they having these curtains? To illustrate that this is the courtyard, okay, and this is the azara. This is the outer part, and this is the inner part. And we already explained, because there's certain halachot that apply to the outer part and certain halachot that apply to the inner part, such as who's allowed to go there, such as where you eat the kodesh kodashim. So they delineated that space by hanging these curtains. Ela shebehechal bonimi bachutz. When it came to the hechal, they built on the outside of the curtains, meaning that there's obviously a thickness to the wall. These walls are made out of stone, right? So when they built, as an example, let's just imagine over here, let's just look over here for 1 second, okay? You have over here, in this picture of the Gemara, right? So you have, let's say, this is a courtyard, and then you have over here an outer courtyard, and then you have over here, the white part is a further courtyard. Let's say this is the Beit HaMikdash. So this is the inner courtyard. So they had a wall. Now the wall had thickness, right? So where did you put the curtain? On the inner side marking of the wall or on the outer side marking of the wall? Says the Mishnah that depended. On the hechal bonimi bachutz, they built it outside the curtain, which means that the curtain was placed on the inner part of the wall. So they started the wall where the curtain was. And when it came to
they couldn't go into
Uba azara bonim mibifnim, and when it came to the azara, the inner part, bonim mibifnim, they built. When it came to the azara, they built azara bonim mibifnim. They built from the inside of the curtain. Why? Because remember, when it came to the inner sanctuary, no one but Kohanim was allowed there, which would mean that if you put the curtain on the inside of the wall, they're already further than where they're allowed to be. So what did they do? They put the curtain on the outer part of the wall. So when they built the wall ended where the curtain was. When it came to the back part of the wall, everyone was allowed to be in that azara because Yisrael is allowed to be in that azara. So where did they have the curtain? The curtain was on the inside. So where did they build the wall? The wall started with the curtain and went out from the curtain as opposed to ending by it. Why did they do this? Because the walls were going to take them a very long time to build. They wanted to be able to function as a Beit HaMikdash and have those zones before it took them years and years and years to build the walls. Yes?
Kohanim were not in construction, apparently.
Kohanim were not in construction. No, exactly. The last people you want in construction is people who get angry easily. They have tempers. Okay, yes?
And how would they do maintenance on the Kodesh HaKodeshim during the year? Not the Kohen Gadol. How did the maintenance guy go in to change the light bulb with an airtime meter, whatever.
So there's a whole sugya on this, on how they did Bedek Habayit in Beit HaMikdash and other cases, and obviously there were certain allowances that were made for such cases. Yeah, there's
to build up a platform so you're not on the ground.
it's an entire sugya, so I don't want to get into exactly what they had to do. Did they cover the Aron? What did they do in the first Beit HaMikdash? Because not only that, we really weren't even supposed to see it. So, how does that work? That's why when they moved the Aron would be covered with a beged, right? The Bigdei Asrad, machloket, which one is either the Bigdei Asrad was to cover the kelim, or there was a special cover made for the Aron. But we find that in the pasuk. One of the reasons is because the Aron was not supposed to be exposed. People were not supposed to look at the Aron. So how does a guy do that if he's not even supposed to, right? So the whole sugya, I don't want to get sidetracked. Yes?
That was my question. I was going to ask how do they
actually
clean? Build the Kodesh HaKodashim if they're not clean?
That's less of a problem because in the first place you might not have, you didn't bring anything into it. You bring the Aron afterwards. Until that point, there's no kedusha. But what he's talking about is after we're already in that position. Now what do we do? Okay, let's continue. The Amar Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua said, Shamati shemakrivim, I heard that you bring korbanot afa pi she'en bait, even though the Beit HaMikdash is not yet standing, is not yet existing. Ochlim kodesh kodashim, so long as you have the mizbeach. Ochlim kodesh kodashim, you could eat the holier korbanot afa pi she'en kelaim, even though you don't have yet curtains around the Beit HaMikdash. Kochim kalim maaseh sheni, you could eat, obviously, kochim kalim and maaseh sheni, which need to be in Yerushalayim, afa pi she'en choma, even though there's no wall delineating Yerushalayim. Why? Mipnei shekedusha rishona kidsha l'sha'ata, v'ksha le'atid lavo. So in the second temple, even before they had kilaim, even before they had a wall, even before they had anything, you would be allowed to eat everything in its proper place without the markings for those proper places. Why? Because when they sanctified in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash, they gave it an eternal sanctification. Okay? And since they did that, since they gave it an eternal sanctification, so now I'm back, second Beit HaMikdash, we have the Mizbeach, we don't have the walls, we don't have the walls of Jerusalem, we don't have the walls, but we still have the Kedusha is on the ground that they designated this place, this earth is designated for that purpose, okay? One just thing I want to point out is that there are people that are makpid, that they're very strict when it comes to going to the temple. We go to the western wall, and everyone writes notes and they stick the note into the wall. There are opinions that are very strict not to stick their hands into cracks in the wall. Why?
People don't even touch it.
Some people don't touch it. Why? Because they feel, especially in the cracks in the wall, that you're entering into the space of the next zone.
Which is the Azara.
Which is the
You
Azara.
would be able to go into that anyway.
Sorry?
You would actually
But not us today because we're
but
tameh.
No, but you're tameh. So in Tumah, you can't even go to the Azara. So there are people that hold that the minute you're sticking your hand in, there's a chayav mitah.
But the kotel is not actually the wall.
The kotel is the outer wall, which gives access to the Azara.
I thought it gives entrance to the next wall, which in there is the Azara.
No,
There's two walls.
that gives access to the Azara. Azara is the courtyard outside the temple. Now, inside the Azara, there's another wall that gives you to the next,
So the
to the
curtains
sanctuary.
in front of the kotel.
Oh, so where's it? That's why am I mentioning this? Because we're talking about this question of the curtains, you see that the Gemara considered the thickness of the wall to be part of the next stage of the place. You see that?
Picture the curtain on the outside.
So if we're talking about curtain being on the inside, curtain being on the outside, because you can't go into the next zone, right? So you see that the thickness of the wall was already considered the next space. So therefore, there are some opinions that don't put the notes in the wall, because the minute you go into the width of the wall, you're already in the next. That's fascinating, according to this Gemara.
You said here that the curtain is on the inside of the wall.
Yes, but why? Why was the curtain on the inside of the
That way
wall?
we wouldn't be able.
In order to ensure that you wouldn't. No,
Not in
on
this
the inner side.
This wall, the curtain on the outside.
This wall's the wall on
so
the outside.
The wall on
one
the outside would have the curtain on the outside.
Now, no. You guys are missing my point. On the outside wall, the curtain was on the inside. Why? Because we don't care if you get into that space. You're allowed to be in that space. But not when you're tameh met like we are. Okay? Let's carry on. Michlal, we'll do, I don't think we're gonna make it. Okay, yeah, let's just carry on until we'll do a little bit more and then we'll stop. The Gemara says, Michlal, according to this, so what do we just want to prove? Michlal, according to this, the Rabbi Eliezer Savar, Lo Kidsha Le'atid Lavo. If Rabbi Yehoshua says, without walls, without klaim, no problem, you could still eat. Why? Because the Kiddusha that they made was a Kiddusha forever. Indicating that the guy who argued on him, which was Rabbi Eliezer, he did not hold that when they sanctified the earth of Jerusalem, that they sanctified it forever. That means that there is an opinion that holds that Kiddusha stops after the first Beit HaMikdash, and therefore they needed to build the second Beit HaMikdash to get back to that zone. So therefore you see that the Tanaim actually argued on the Kiddusha of Jerusalem being an eternal Kiddusha. Okay, Amale Ravina, the Ravina said to Ravashi, Mimai, how do you know? You just proved from the fact that Rabbi Yoshua says the words that the Kiddusha is eternal, that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold like that. Dilma, maybe, Tekuli Kiddusha Rishona Kiddusha L'Sha'ata. Everyone holds that when that first sanctification happened, it happened forever and ever. Kiddusha L'Atid Lavo. Mar, Mai Dishmiya Lekamar. But what were they arguing in? Rabbi Eliezer was explaining to you, he was telling you over the halacha that he heard. Umar, right? Umar, my dishmiya lekamar. And one, Rabbi Yoshua, was saying over the Braita the way that he heard. But one could understand Rabbi Eliezer also in the context of Kiddusha Rishona, Kiddusha L'Sha'ata, regardless. And if you're going to ask me if that's the case, if they were just saying over the halakha the way that they heard it, but they both agreed, he also holds Kiddusha Rishona, Kiddusha L'Sha'ata. But when his rabbi taught him that halakha, he didn't say it with that sentence, but he also meant it. So you'll ask me on that, if you'll say, why do I need walls then if the ground is sanctified? And says the Gemara, it was the only reason why Rabbi Eliezer held that those were necessary. You needed those walls, right? You needed those kilaim, was in order to have that there was tziniut, there was privacy, that what was happening in the Beit HaMikdash was display. And since that was the case, so there's an alternate reason why he might have suggested that he needed kilaim. But could be he held that regardless, they were actually able to eat in those places because of Kiddusha Rishona, Kiddusha L'Sha'ata. Okay, so you have no proof from here that there's a machloket Tanaim on whether or not the Kiddusha is eternal. Ela kihani Tanai. Rather, we learn from this machloket Tanaim that there is a discrepancy of opinion. Titania, because it says, Amar Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi, Yishmael said in the name of the son of Rabbi Yossi, Lama Manu Chachamim et Elu. Why did our Chachamim specifically state the cities that they stated when it came to delineating the cities that were walled? Because when they came up from exile, they found these cities, vikidshum, and they sanctified those cities as walled cities. Okay, Ava Rishonot Batelu, the original walled cities that were there from before, right? They canceled them. Batelu b'shebatla aretz, once the sanctity of the Beit HaMikdash left. So the sanctity of Eretz Israel left. So therefore, the sanctity of those cities also left. Alma kasavar. You see from here, Kiddusha Rishona, Kiddusha L'Sha'ata, Lo Kiddusha L'Atid Lavo. Because what did we just say? We said that the sanctity of Eretz Israel was batel, was it stopped, it ceased. So you see, we have over here a Mishnah that says clearly that the Kiddusha of Eretz Israel, of Yerushalayim, stopped. Viraminu, 1 second. If you're telling me that Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi, he is the one that holds that Kiddusha stopped, I have another Braita in his own name. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi, V'chi'elu bilvad hayu, were these the only cities, the cities that they had listed over there? Were those the only cities that were walled in time of Yoshua? V'alo kvar ne'emar, it says Shishim ir kol chevel argov. The pasuk says that there were 60 cities, the entire area of Argov. So you see that there is not the few that were mentioned in the Mishnah over there, but rather 60. And it says, Kol ele, all of these, Arim, B'tzurot, Choma, Gvoa, they were fortified cities with giant walls. So you see that all of those cities, and that pasuk describes cities in the time of Yoshua. Why did the Chachamim say specifically the ones that are listed in the Mishnah. When they came back from Galut, they found those cities, and those are the ones that they were Mekadesh. So the Braita now says, 1 second, Kiddeshum, you mean to say that they sanctified those cities, Hashta, now at the point when they came back from exile? Right? Amri, lo tzricha likdushi. But later on, in the Braita itself, in the same Braita that you're quoting, it says that there was no need to sanctify them again. Right? Why? It was done from before. Ela matzu et elu uminaum. Rather, says the Gemara, says the Braita, what it means when it says that they sanctified them, it just means that they listed them, that they told over people that these not are kadosh, but these were kadosh. So they had no obligation to sanctify them again. They just revealed to the public that these were the sanctified cities. Not only these were the ones, right, of a walled city. Any city where there's some masoret that city was walled in the time of Yoshua, all these mitzvot of a walled city, noagim ba, apply to those cities, even if it's not listed in the returning of the exiles back to Eretz Israel. Anything that we have such a tradition about, that would be enough for it to have the holiness of a walled city, and it reverts back without any further deed. Why? Because the holiness that was instituted at that time permeated forever. So clearly we have now a Braita, and who says it? Rabbi Yoshua ben Rabbi Yossi, the same person, and he says that Kedusha is eternal. So we have now another Braita that seems to indicate that Rabbi Yoshua ben Rabbi Yossi also holds this. Rabbi Yishmael ben Yossi also holds that Kedusha is eternal. Gemara says, Kasha de Rabbi Yishmael ad Rabbi Yishmael. The question is that we have two Braitot, a Mishnah and a Braita, that seem to indicate that Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi, one case says that his Kedusha is eternal, one case says not. It says the Gemara, Tre Tanai Ali ben Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi. There's two Tanaim reporting what Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi's opinion is, and they disagreed. One was the Mishnah, one was the Braita. So what are we left with? We're left with one opinion that says there's a Machloket Tanaim, i.e. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi fighting against our Mishnah. The second Tana, according to Rabbi Yossi, which is the Tana of the Braita, that says Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi held of an eternal Kedusha, and therefore we have no Machloket Tanaim. And we're going to finish with this last answer. The Gemara says, and maybe you'll say, Ha Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi. This Braita is not Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi, it's Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi. And he actually holds of this. The Tanya, because we have a Braita, Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi, Omer, Amar, Asher lo choma, the Pasuk says, a city that does not have a wall. Afa pisha en lo achshav, even though it does not have a wall now, v'haya lo kodem lachen, but it had a wall earlier at the time of Yehoshua, that is enough for it to remain sanctified. So therefore, the second answer of the Gemara is that it's not a contradiction between Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi. Rather, the second one is Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi, but the reason of Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi is that Kedusha ceases. So we again have a machloket between Tanaim, either between Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi and our Mishnah, or between Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi and our Mishnah, in which case, we have a Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yossi who argues on this Mishnah, on our Mishnah, and Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi that we're translating the Braita to say, and Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yossi holds like us in our Mishnah. So we've solved the contradiction, and we remain with a machloket Tanaim on whether or not this Kiddusha is Kiddusha L'Sha'ata. Now, the last thing I want to just draw your attention to is that because we got to where we just got to, we are left with a question we're going to deal with next week. Remember, Rabbi Yitzchak told us that he had a teaching from his teachers that said that you could bring a korban in the temple of Chonyo, correct?
Yes.
And we knocked him out because we said there's a Mishnah that says explicitly that the Kiddusha is eternal, meaning that after the destruction you can't do that. So Rabbi Yitzchak reverted from the opinion that he heard from his teachers. Now that we have another Tana that says, i.e., Rabbi Ishmael ben Rabbi Yossi, that says that you're allowed to bring, that the Kedusha is not eternal, Rabbi Yitzchak can say, I hold like Rabbi Ishmael ben Rabbi Yossi. And therefore, the teaching that he got from his teachers that you could bring in a temple in Chonyo is still a possibility. So why does Rabbi Yitzchak revert from his Chonyo sacrifice opinion that he heard from his rabbis if there's a Tanaic source for that? There's multiple answers to this question, but we'll cover that next week.